What you are seeing now is the video that got this channel started, a broad and balanced commentary on Jordan Peterson. In this video, I spoke of how he was not only a professor of mine at the University of Toronto, but also one of the two best professors I have ever had. I talked about how he was quite possibly the most brilliant person in the entire faculty, and I went on to talk about how I was completely on his side on Bill C-16, and even held him as a hero for several years. I finished by talking about how I have lost admiration for him, and cited evidence that I'm definitely not the only one who was part of his base that had been souring on him. I will show on the screen now a couple of surveys, informal surveys I posted on his own subreddit. So back in August 2022, and then again this January, I posted polls asking members of the Jordan Peterson subreddit community if their opinions of Peterson had gone up, down, or stayed roughly the same as compared to how they felt about him during the early years of his fame. Nearly 600 people responded across the two polls, and while the plurality of respondents said that their opinions of Peterson were about the same, the number of people who said that their opinion of him had gone down nearly doubled the number who had said that it went up. And again, this was his own Reddit community. Now, were these scientific polls with representative samples? No, but they were fairly worded. They generated hundreds of responses, and their results are quite fitting with what I've observed participating in the Peterson subreddit community. It is not infrequent to see people just disappointed in him and questioning what is happening to him. So to state what I hope should be obvious, this is not a takedown video by someone who has always hated Jordan Peterson and looks for any opportunity to condemn him. This is a video lament that someone that I viewed as having the potential to be one of the most significant and positive cultural and political figures of his lifetime is torching this very potential. As I said, I once held Peterson as a hero. The reason for this being that I perceived him to be an embodiment of things that I value highly: intelligence, eloquence, personal responsibility, a commitment to free speech, an opposition to authoritarian and victimhood-based identity politics, the ability to remain civil, constructive, and honest even when dealing with people who are being anything but, and a consistent effort to give a fair hearing and representation of the values of both sides. I thought that he could help in building bridges between left and right by helping each better understand the validity of the other side, as well as where each side can go too far. I loved the insights that he offered on human psychology and sociology, and of course, I loved the wisdom he had to offer to people trying to get their lives together. So it brings me no pleasure to say that he is not who he used to be anymore. But I'm going to show clear-cut evidence that this in fact is true. Whereas he used to say that he wasn't primarily political, but rather primarily religious and psychological in his orientation, I believe that he has become one of the most polarizing, one-sided partisans out there. He has gone from being a right-leaning individual who would give both sides their due to being a right-wing windbag, essentially. Peterson used to say that a telltale sign that you're dealing with an ideologue is that you can predict what they will say. Peterson has become incredibly predictable. Each time a new issue comes up and you want to know what Peterson thinks about it, just ask yourself, what would an angry, petty, right-wing partisan who is fixated on wokeness and insistent upon angering the left think? You'll probably be at least in the ballpark. His answer will definitely be on the right, or almost definitely. The only question is which aspect of the right. With the exception of Russell Brand, by all appearances, he has become absolutely allergic to saying anything nice about anyone or anything coming from the left. I suppose I should also add Joe Rogan to this, although I would say he's more centrist, but anyhow. And I say all of this as someone who is center-right myself. It's not like I have some aversion to hearing right-leaning perspectives. But to me, and in many ways to Peterson, at least originally, His primary role was not to be a right-wing pundit, but to be a principled, constructive, and fair-minded voice that would help people better understand each side of the conflicts that we happen to be enmeshed within. This is why I'm making a video critical of Peterson and not, say, Ben Shapiro. So let's look at how he's changed. First, let's consider civility and emotional composure. One of Peterson's biggest moments was his interview with Kathy Newman, in which she spent the majority of the conversation trying to take Peterson down with one dishonest, maximally negative interpretation of what he said after another.
But you're saying basically it doesn't matter if women aren't getting to the top, because that's what's skewing that gender pay gap, isn't it?
No.
You're saying, well, that's just a fact of life. Women aren't necessarily going to get to the top.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't matter either.
You're saying it's a fact
there are
of
multiple
life.
reasons for it.
So you were saying that by and large, women are too agreeable to get the pay rises they deserve.
No, I'm saying that that's one component of a multivariate equation that predicts salary.
Now, despite her disingenuity, as you can see, Peterson remained the adult in the room throughout, and he came out looking fantastic. This was Peterson at his absolute best. Now compare this to how he responded to Kyle Kulinski during their tense exchange.
People are who they are, and if they're gay, they just decided to be like, yeah, I'm gay, and they were just more open and honest with themselves. So I don't think you're promoting people to do that.
No,
you're
that's
just
not
saying,
what happened.
if you are that, it's
completely
okay.
wrong.
Okay, well,
You're utterly
I'm
wrong.
listening.
There's
I'm
nothing
listening.
about that that's right.
Audio cut.
It used to be very repressed because that's very outside of the tradition and the norm and the standard, and that now when you sort of let the boot off the neck a little bit.
What used to be suppressed?
The entire LGBTQ community. I mean, it was very recently we even got gay marriage in the United States.
First of all, they're not a community.
Well, you understand the point I'm
community?
making.
No, actually, neither I understand it nor you, and that's why we're delving into it.
In the early days of his fame, Peterson used to say that we need to raise up reasonable voices on the left, give them a platform so that they can take their movement back from the identitarians. Well, Peterson has a big platform, and there are reasonable, non-identitarian political commentators on the left. Kyle Kulinski, Crystal Ball, Jimmy Dore, David Pakman, to name a few. In the past 4 or 5 years, this one unnecessarily hostile conversation with Kyle was the only conversation that he gave any of them. A quick clarification, I don't want to give the impression that Peterson was hostile like this the whole interview with Kyle. He wasn't. Most of what I saw of this interview had Peterson being quite polite. However, this is the kind of hostility that he did not engage in often at all early on, and as we'll get into further in this video, he's doing it more and more now. Now, yes, he'll talk to left-sided voices if they're big names, like Russell Brand, for example, or if they're from a big media outlet like the Sunday Times in London or GQ magazine. But otherwise, this supposedly not primarily political individual can only fit in one knowledgeable lefty who will challenge him every 4 years. Peterson has managed to be even more uncivil on Twitter, actively going out of his way to be obnoxious to the left. Consider his tweet to Al Gore in response to a Dave Rubin tweet referring to a World Economic Forum luncheon that Gore attended. Peterson tweets, "With all due respect," clearly passive-aggressive, "Mr. Gore, you're looking a bit heavy, puffy, and inflamed. You might consider cutting down on carbs and eating more red meat." Or this tweet about trans women and abortion. Or this one about self-harm, or his sorry, not beautiful tweet. Now yes, I do get the backstory behind these tweets. The World Economic Forum is trying to discourage the masses from eating red meat, whereas they themselves will probably be among the very last people to make that sacrifice if they ever do. Transgender and social justice ideology are replete with incoherencies, and their advocates have a history of getting very wound up and self-righteous, which does invite mockery. And yes, there are regular media efforts to socially engineer us to pretend that biology is irrelevant and that evolution shaped every aspect of ourselves except for our brains. kind of like when the Catholic Church accepted evolutionary theory just so long as it stays the hell away from the soul. But is he an esteemed professor, an internet father figure, and not primarily political? Or is he merely a new, better credentialed Milo, an attention-hungry, bomb-throwing professional troll? His changing taste in fashion suggests that this might be something, there might be something to this Milo theory. Now, let's consider Peterson's balance, then and now. For the first few years of his fame, Peterson spoke about the left and right in very constructive and balanced ways. He spoke repeatedly on how a functioning society needs both, that they each bring valuable things to the table, that they each help prevent the other from going too far, and indeed, he spoke about how each side can and sometimes does go too far.
I'm not right-wing, so the characterization isn't very helpful. And one of the things I do all the time in my public lectures is make a case for the utility of the left. So the case can be made quite rapidly. If you're going to pursue things of value in a social environment, you're going to produce a hierarchy. It's unavoidable because some people are better at whatever it is that you value. And so when that lays itself out socially, it will produce a hierarchy. The hierarchy has a necessity if you're going to pursue the things of value, but it has a risk. The risk is that we'll ossify and become corrupt. That's risk number one. And risk number two is that when you produce the hierarchy, you're going to dispossess a number of people, because there'll be lots of people in the hierarchy who aren't good at it, and they'll be dispossessed. So you need a political voice for them. That's the left. So I make that case over and over. Now, what the right does is say, yeah, but we still need the hierarchy. It's like, yes, you still need the hierarchy. The reason we need the political dialogue is because we need the hierarchy and we can't let it get out of control. So the way to balance those two competing necessities isn't by only having the hierarchy or dissolving the hierarchy. You have to live with the tension. And the way, because the situation keeps shifting. So the way you live with the tension is by talking.
Now compare that to how he responded to Jagmeet Singh's tweet, which I'm showing right now. Singh, a leftist political leader in Canada, tweeted, "Corporate profits up 118.3% since 2019. Meanwhile, workers' wages have taken a major hit. When will the Liberals and Conservatives speak up against the corporate greed that's gouging Canadians?" To which Peterson responded with, "Have you had a single original idea in your life, Jagmeet Singh? Can you do nothing but repeat slogans that were already dated in the 1930s? Are you truly the best that the NDP can muster? Your Labour leader forebears must be spinning in their graves." Now, Jagmeet Singh is very much a social justice identitarian type, and he frequently does engage in identity politics. But in this particular tweet, he was serving the exact function that Peterson of old said was the valid and noble function of the left. And how is the age of an idea an indictment of it? It's not like in Christian or like in creationist evolution debates, the creationists will say things like, "Oh, you're not going to bring up that tired old fossil record again, are you?" Peterson has dedicated an inordinate amount of time in his life to studying old ideas that continue to be relevant. Now he suddenly has contempt for older ideas? Interesting timing, isn't it? He also sometimes engages in politician-level disingenuity. Consider him talking about climate change with Joe Rogan.
Well, that's because there's no such thing as climate, right? Climate and everything are the same word. And that's what bothers me about the climate change types. It's like, this is something that bothers me about it technically. It's like, well, climate is about everything. So, okay. But your models aren't based on everything. Your models are based on a set number of variables.
Yeah.
So that means you've reduced the variables, which are everything, to that set. Well, how did you decide which set of variables to include in the equation if it's about everything?
This is rank idiocy. Yes, Climate is a complex, massive, multivariable concept. So is depression. But when was the last time you heard Peterson say, you can't go trying to solve depression? Depression is everything. Depression is your neurochemistry, your upbringing, your diet, your exercise, your family structure, the quality of your neighborhood and schools, whether or not you're in a war-torn country, and so on and on and on. You could say the same thing about fitness. Why doesn't he say, hey, we can't be looking into what is relevant to health and fitness. Fitness is everything. Fitness and health, they are your diet, your exercise, your genetics, the air quality, the water quality, your access to healthcare, whether or not you have a home, and about 6,000 other things. He would never make this kind of argument, yet he does when it comes to climate change, and I have a feeling it's because he can't help himself. He constantly feels the need to stick his thumb in the eye of the left every chance he gets and to feed red meat to the right. And then there's his pride as sin tweet. Here he's pretending to not know that there is more than one meaning to the word pride. And clearly the one that is being referred to by the gay and LGBT pride movements has been the you don't need to be ashamed of yourself type meaning, not the arrogance and self-conceit side of things. Peterson also referred to the doctor who performed the surgeries on Elliot Page as a criminal and declined to say that Ellen had a right to go through the transition.
I'm a classical liberal.
Though, of course, these examples of disingenuity and obfuscation don't hold a candle to the sophistry he regularly engages in every time someone asks him if he believes in God. But that's a whole other thing. I've had a few people criticize me for having held Peterson as a hero. One line of criticism boils down to, how could you have a single positive thing to say about him? This is not a criticism that I think dignifies a response. Another line of criticism being, what kind of full-grown man needs a hero in the first place? To this I say that heroes can be very helpful. There are things that we value. Sometimes we find people who embody those valued things extremely well. These sorts of people, they can inspire us, show us how it's done, show us the rewards that can come from exercising these values, and they can also take away our excuses from ourselves as to why we're not living up to these values as well as maybe we could be. And then there's, lastly, the cultism accusations. And there absolutely are Peterson cultists. I'm sure some of them will show up in the comment section of this very video. These types are the polar opposite of the first type of critic I noted here, but instead of not being able to comprehend how anyone could say anything positive about Peterson, they struggle to understand how anyone could have anything critical to say about him ever. Here's the difference between a person who holds someone as a hero in a healthy way and a person who holds someone as a hero in an unhealthy way, a cultist way. In the former case, the hero exudes a person's highly prized values, and so they admire them greatly. But when the person starts drifting away from the values, the healthy hero haver will seriously question whether this person fits the hero bill anymore. And if they don't, they will drop him or her as a hero. Whereas the more unhealthy culty type will put the hero over the values that won them over in the first place, make excuses for them, and so forth. Though perhaps I'm being unfair in this assessment. Another explanation is that these people that I'm calling unhealthy and culty admired Peterson for reasons different from my reasons. Many of them liked him because he was great at owning the libs. And, well, if that's one of their favorite things about him becoming more aggressive about it may be something that they welcome and see no reason to even need to excuse. My guess is that this is actually more often than the case than the less flattering option I put forth first. So that's a lot of negativity and hostility that I just threw at you. So let me pave the way to the conclusion of this video with some compassion for Jordan Peterson. Jordan has gone through an absolute gauntlet. For the entirety of his fame, he has been getting attacked from the left internationally on a pretty much minutely basis, and especially during the early years, much of the criticism and condemnation that he received was rooted in malice and dishonesty. Further, early on, he had legitimate cause to worry about trouble with the law in Canada, punishment from U of T, perhaps including a revocation of his tenure, and loss of his clinical license, something that could be playing out right now. Then there was the frequent high-pressure interviews, him living out of hotel rooms and probably being jet-lagged, half the time, all the time. Then there was his wife being diagnosed with a terminal diagnosis that was expected to end her life in the very near future. Fortunately, she unexpectedly rebounded from this. Then there was the COVID lockdown, and, that many of us can attest to the negative mental health effects of, and, he and several of his relatives got COVID, him and themselves. And then there was him having to go into an induced coma and then struggle for a few years with the lingering effects of a benzodiazepine addiction. You see him now and he looks like he weighs 8 pounds. He has gone through a lot. But you know who has consistently been on his side throughout all this? The right. It's not that crazy to see a person that was already right of center move further right after years of being smeared by the left and love-bombed by the right. And no question that the other challenges that he has gone through have reduced his emotional stamina, making it harder for him to act today the way that he acted with Kathy Newman several years ago. I honestly think that he came back too soon and has taken on too much. He doesn't have the emotional, cognitive, or physical bandwidth at this time to do what he's doing, and it's showing. And this is not a criticism of him. Almost nobody would be able to handle what he has been confronting. And I think many of those in his base that are disappointed in him recognize this. But I also think that, like me, many in his base expected more from him. Not because they were owed more, but because of Peterson's heroic track record. For several years, I believed that Peterson could be a person of historic significance. I believed that he could go down in history as one of the world's most significant cultural and political figures of his lifetime. I thought he could help mend the divisions in the culture war by showing people how toxic and unreasonable people on the extremes were being, particularly on the left, but also on the right. But now it disappoints me to say that I think he is actually playing a leading role in making a toxic situation that much more toxic. I'm also disappointed because I think that the wisdom he has to offer on how to get one's life together is extremely valuable. But it will be ignored by most people because he has made himself such that you pretty much have to be a right-winger to be able to tolerate listening to him. Now, some of his supporters have said to me that he's much better in his video conversations podcasts than he is on Twitter. I'm sure he is, and I've seen some evidence of this. Indeed, it wouldn't take much. But the problem is that, one, it is him on Twitter. His behavior there represents him, just as his behavior on his podcast represents him. And two, I ask, how many people who would love and benefit from the content of his podcast, how many of them would have no interest in listening to him after seeing how he comports himself on Twitter, or even on YouTube, or in the interview with Kyle Kalinske? Anyhow, when I made my original Peterson video, I concluded by expressing hope that he would correct course. And indeed, just a few days prior to me releasing the video, he actually, unbeknownst to me at the time, had released a video in conversation with Greg Hurwitz and Jonathan Peugeot, two friends of his, wherein they, though particularly Greg, confronted him about his mean tweets. A strength of Peterson is that he can take criticism from well-meaning people quite well. This was the case in this particular conversation, which gave me hope. Now, thus far, I don't believe that he has lived up to that hope. However, once again, he has given me a microscopically small glimmer of hope. I'll end by commending Peterson's integrity in sticking by the principle of free speech in his recent discussion with Joe Rogan about Ron DeSantis' position on Black history education in Florida.
So I'm an admirer in many ways of what's going on in Florida, with DeSantis, but him and Rufo, who I also think has got a bit of a clue, are trying to, what would you say, limit or even ban critical race theory. And the problem with that is you can't define it, right?
Right.
So how do you control something you can't define? And the answer is you battle it out on the battleground of ideas.
Now, there absolutely is nuance in this issue, and it's not simply a matter of freedom of speech. But it was nice to see Peterson stand by his principle, even when it opposes someone on the right, someone that he likes, rather than someone on the left. Okay, so I'm going to conclude with one last message to supporters of Peterson who don't mind or even enjoy his increasingly polarized, aggressive tone. Early on, while Jordan's opponents were often being unreasonable, dishonest, and sometimes belligerent, he remained the adult in the room. This allowed him to come off much better than his opponents to people across the political spectrum, excluding most of the far left, of course, making it much easier for him to win them over. Consider the Israel-Palestine conflict. Many people do not have an opinion on this. There has been so much violence coming from each side that many people just throw their hands up in the air if asked for an opinion. When Peterson engages in mudslinging, he's putting casual observers in a similar situation. Though it's actually even worse than that, since his opponents take the mantle of marginalized groups and portray him as a mean, mad white man, he actually steps right into their framing. In this analogy, Peterson would be Israel 20 minutes after an Israeli attack on Gaza. If he wants to win over hearts and minds, and if he wants to help as many people as he can, I say he should go back to his roots, being the adult in the room. And that does it. I've really tried to be fair and constructive here. Please let me know how you think I did, and let me know what you think. And if you'd like to hear more intentionally balanced, nuanced, constructive coverage of important issues, subscribe, come back soon, and thank you so much for giving me some of your time.